The elegant restaurant was bustling with the noise of fine dining. The sound of clinking glasses and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. Soft jazz music played in the background, setting a sophisticated tone. At a table near the window, a billionaire CEO, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, was enjoying an intimate dinner with his family. His young daughter sat beside him, her face lit with excitement, and his wife smiled across the table. The view from the restaurant overlooked the sparkling city below, adding to the grandeur of the evening. But everything changed in an instant. The tranquility of the night was shattered when the manager of the restaurant, a middle-aged man in a formal suit, approached the table with a scowl on his face. His words, sharp and condescending, cut through the air like a blade. He addressed the young girl, reprimanding her for what seemed like a minor mistake. "You spilled water on the table," he sneered, his voice rising. "Maybe you're not old enough to handle such things. How do you expect to be taken seriously here?" The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The guests at nearby tables froze, their conversations coming to an abrupt halt. The clinking of silverware stopped, and all eyes were drawn to the scene unfolding. The young girl's eyes welled with tears as she looked up at her father, seeking comfort and reassurance. But her father, the CEO, remained silent. He didn't intervene right away. He simply stared at the table, visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to address the situation. His wife looked nervously from him to their daughter, unsure of what to do. The manager, sensing the power he held in the moment, continued his tirade. He berated the girl further, his words dripping with disdain. "If you can't even handle a glass of water, maybe you should leave the dining room." The tension in the air was palpable, and the guests watched in stunned silence. No one dared to speak up. No one dared to challenge the man in charge. In that moment, the young girl's humiliation seemed almost certain. But what happened next would change everything. Out of nowhere, a calm voice interrupted the manager's harsh words. "Respect isn't yours to give," came the firm reply. The room fell silent once again as all eyes turned toward the source of the voice. It was the waitress, a young woman of color, who had been quietly moving between tables, unnoticed by most. Now, she stood with her arms crossed, her posture unwavering. The manager, taken aback, looked at her, his arrogance faltering for just a moment, but it was too late. The words had already been said, and they rang out across the room. The CEO looked up slowly, his eyes widening as he processed what had just occurred. His daughter, still trying to hold back tears, now felt a sense of relief wash over her. The waitress had stood up for her, and in that moment, she had shown more strength than anyone else in the room. The manager, now realizing the gravity of his actions, stood frozen, unable to respond. The power in the room had shifted. It was no longer about the CEO or the manager. It was about the young waitress who had just reclaimed the respect that had been so carelessly taken from the girl. The CEO's face turned red with a mix of embarrassment and anger, but it was clear that something inside him had shifted. The rest of the room, too, had felt the impact of her words. What was once an uncomfortable dinner had now become a moment of undeniable power, and the waitress had proven, without a doubt, that respect was something earned, not given. The atmosphere in the restaurant remained thick with tension, as the words, "Respect isn't yours to give," hung in the air like a challenge, breaking the silence that had enveloped the room. The young waitress, her posture straight and her expression calm but determined, stood her ground. The manager, caught off guard by the sudden defiance, was rendered momentarily speechless. His arrogance faltered, and for the first time that night, he was unsure of himself. The eyes of the room shifted from him to the waitress, whose presence now commanded the attention of everyone. The CEO, initially silent, finally broke his gaze from the table and looked at the waitress. His face, once calm and indifferent, was now clouded with a mix of confusion and intrigue. For a moment, he seemed to reconsider everything he thought he knew about the power dynamics at play. His daughter, still sitting beside him, wiped away a tear, sensing the shift in the room. The waitress had stood up not just for her, but for every person who had ever been belittled or overlooked. The manager, realizing that his position of authority had been stripped away, shifted uncomfortably under the gaze of the room. The arrogance that had marked his tone was now gone, replaced by a nervous tension. The silence that followed was deafening, and it seemed as though the entire room was waiting for the next move. The waitress, however, showed no signs of hesitation. She knew what she had to do, and in that moment, she had taken back control. The power in the room had shifted. The focus had moved from the CEO's wealth and status to the quiet strength of the waitress. Her simple words had turned the tide. The CEO, still processing the situation, finally turned to the manager with a look of stern disappointment. He didn't need to say much. The manager's face flushed with humiliation as he realized the gravity of what had just occurred. The CEO's voice, now low but filled with authority, broke the silence. "Apologize to her," he said, his words steady but sharp. The manager hesitated for a brief moment before reluctantly muttering an apology, but the damage had already been done. The moment of reversal, of power shifting in a single exchange of words, could not be undone. The waitress, still standing tall, didn't react to the apology. She had already won in her own way. It wasn't about the apology, it was about the respect that had been demanded. The CEO, who had spent his career wielding power over others, now understood the weight of his own silence in the face of injustice. He looked at the waitress, his expression shifting from surprise to something deeper respect. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any monetary offer. The guests in the room, who had once been mere spectators, now realized the importance of what had just transpired. It wasn't about wealth or status anymore. It was about humanity, dignity, and respect. The young waitress, though still in her uniform, had just taught everyone in the room a lesson in the power of standing up for what's right. The manager, still standing off to the side, couldn't meet anyone's eyes. He had lost not only his power, but also his dignity. The CEO, on the other hand, sat back in his chair, a look of quiet reflection on his face. He had been the one who held all the cards just moments before, and yet now, he was the one learning the most important lesson of the night. The respect that had been denied for so long had been earned in that single moment, and it had cost him nothing but his pride. The atmosphere in the room, once heavy with tension, now felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. The waitress, who had once been invisible to so many, was now the most important person in the room, and as she turned to walk away, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that no amount of money could ever buy. The room remained quiet for a few moments after the manager's apology. The tension in the air slowly began to lift, but the silence that followed was filled with an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. The CEO, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, took a deep breath. He glanced at his daughter, who had stopped crying and was now looking up at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. For the first time in what felt like forever, she seemed to feel safe again, like someone truly had her back. The CEO's gaze moved from his daughter to the waitress who had so boldly stood up for her. She was walking away, her posture still straight, her head held high. He watched her for a moment before finally speaking up. "Wait," he called out. The waitress paused, but did not turn around. She was already moving towards the kitchen, back to her duties. The CEO stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of the other guests. He walked toward her, his footsteps slow but purposeful. The room watched in silence as he approached. The waitress stopped and slowly turned to face him. For a moment, they simply stood there, locked in a quiet stare. The CEO took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "What happened here tonight? It should never have occurred." The waitress nodded, not saying a word, waiting for him to continue. "I saw how you stepped in, how you protected my daughter, and I realized something," he continued. "I've spent my whole life building an empire, thinking I controlled everything around me. But in that moment, you reminded me of something far more important, that real power comes from respecting others, from standing up for what's right." The room, which had been filled with tension moments before, now seemed to buzz with quiet anticipation. The guests at the other tables exchanged looks, and some even nodded, sensing the significance of this moment. The CEO's words were not just an apology, they were a realization, a transformation of his own understanding of power and respect. The waitress looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to speak. "Respect is something that everyone should give freely," she said calmly, her voice steady and strong. "But it's not something you can demand from others just because you have money or status. It's something that has to be earned, just like trust." The CEO stood there, taking in her words. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lesson she had just imparted. "You're absolutely right," he said, his voice now softening, "and I want you to know that I've learned that lesson. I'm sorry for what happened earlier, and I promise you things are going to be different from now on." The waitress gave him a small nod, acknowledging his words but not needing anything more. She wasn't looking for a grand gesture. She had already made her point, but the CEO wasn't finished yet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, offering her a generous tip. "This is for you," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Not just for tonight, but for showing me something that I couldn't see before. For showing me that true respect isn't something you buy, it's something you give." The waitress hesitated for a moment, then took the money, nodding her thanks. It wasn't about the tip for her. It was about the fact that someone with the power to change things had acknowledged her worth, had recognized her humanity. As the CEO turned and walked back to his table, the room slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the energy had shifted. People were talking again, but there was a new level of respect in the air. The waitress went back to her duties, her head still held high, knowing that she had made a difference, that she had stood up for what was right. She hadn't just changed the course of the evening, she had changed the way people saw her, and maybe even the way they saw each other. As she moved between tables, serving drinks and clearing plates, she couldn't help but think that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest impact. And tonight, she had proved that, even in a world where power and wealth often seem to rule, respect and dignity could never be bought. They had to be earned. The next morning, the restaurant was bustling once again, the usual hum of conversation and clinking silverware filling the air. The CEO, now back in his office, sat at his desk, his mind racing with the events of the previous night. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who always agreed with him, who saw him as a leader, a figure to be admired. But last night, in the most unexpected of places, he had been taught a lesson he would never forget. He had always prided himself on his power, on his ability to control situations and dictate outcomes. But in one moment, when the waitress had stood up for his daughter, he had witnessed something far more powerful than wealth or status. It was respect. True respect. The kind that couldn't be bought or manipulated, but had to be earned. The kind that flowed from the heart, from a sense of dignity and humanity. He leaned back in his chair, reflecting on his life, his career, the countless deals he had made. But this had been different. This was real. He thought back to his daughter's face, the way her eyes had brightened when the waitress stepped in to protect her. For the first time in a long while, he realized that the most important thing in his life was not his empire, but the people he cared about. And in that moment, he vowed to never again let power or money blind him to the true value of respect. The next day, as he sat at his desk, making phone calls and signing documents, a thought crossed his mind. What if he could use his influence, his wealth, to create opportunities for people like the waitress? What if he could change the narrative, create a world where respect was the foundation of every relationship, both personal and professional? It was a bold thought, but one that felt right. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hello, is this Miss Williams?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with purpose. The woman on the other end of the line, a bit startled, replied, "Yes, this is she." "I want to meet with you," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "I want to offer you something more than just a tip." The line was silent for a moment, and then she replied, "I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Caldwell. What do you mean?" The CEO took a deep breath. "I mean, I want to offer you a chance to be a part of something bigger. I want to offer you a position in one of my companies. A role where your talent and your dignity will be recognized, where you can help shape the future." Miss Williams was silent for a moment, stunned by the unexpected offer. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm serious," he replied, his voice unwavering. "I've learned a lot in the past 24 hours, and I think it's time for me to start doing things differently. I want to do the right thing." After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I don't know what to say, but yes, I'll meet with you." The CEO smiled, a sense of fulfillment filling him. He had done more than just acknowledge her worth. He had given her a chance to make a real impact, a chance to change her life, and in doing so, he had also changed his own. As he hung up the phone, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The journey he was about to embark on was not one of wealth or status. It was one of growth, respect, and equality. A journey where he would work to make sure that no one, no matter their background, would ever be overlooked or undervalued again. As the day went on, he couldn't help but think about the lesson the waitress had taught him. She had shown him that the real power in the world was not in the money you accumulated or the deals you struck. It was in the respect you gave to others. It was in the way you treated people, not as objects to be used, but as individuals worthy of dignity and respect. And that, more than anything, was the legacy he hoped to leave behind. The following day, the CEO couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. He spent most of the morning in his office, thinking about the encounter from the night before. The moment when the waitress had stood up and demanded respect, not just for his daughter but for herself, had left an impression he could not ignore. It wasn't just the power she had in that moment. It was the way she had used her voice to show that respect couldn't be bought, it had to be earned. He had always thought that wealth and influence could solve everything, but now, he realized that true power wasn't measured in dollars or status. It was about respect, dignity, and standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. He thought about the waitress, her calm yet assertive demeanor, the way she had quietly commanded attention without raising her voice. She had not only protected his daughter but had done so in a way that forced him to confront his own blind spots. For so long, he had been surrounded by people who agreed with him, who never questioned his decisions. But she, in just a few moments, had done what no one else dared to do. She had made him reflect on his actions and beliefs. By the time the CEO returned home that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about how to act on the lessons he had learned. He knew that he had to do more than just change his thinking. He needed to change the way he lived, the way he interacted with the world around him. The next morning, he scheduled a meeting with his team and instructed them to change the way they viewed people in their organization. He wanted to make sure that respect, integrity, and fairness would be at the forefront of every decision, every business deal, and every interaction. But he wasn't done yet. He had one more thing to do. The CEO called the waitress, Miss Williams, the woman who had not only stood up for his daughter but had stood up for what was right. He was determined to do more than just apologize. He needed to show her that her actions had made an impact far beyond that one moment. He called her phone, and when she answered, he wasted no time. "Miss Williams, I've been thinking about what happened last night," he began. "And I want to tell you that I owe you more than just an apology. Your actions were a wake-up call for me. They made me realize how much I've been missing in my approach to life and business. I want to meet with you, not just to thank you, but to offer you something meaningful." Miss Williams, though surprised by the call, agreed to meet with him the next day. They set a time and place, and when the CEO arrived, he was determined to show her how serious he was. He greeted her with a respectful nod and a handshake. "Miss Williams, I want to offer you a position at one of my companies. I want to bring you into the team, not just because of what you did for my daughter, but because you showed me that integrity and respect are more valuable than any contract or deal. I believe you can help shape the future, and I want you to be a part of that." Miss Williams stood there, momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected this kind of offer. She had done what she thought was right in the moment, never expecting anything in return. But here she was, facing a man who had seen the value in her actions and was willing to take a chance on her. After a brief pause, she looked him in the eyes and said, "Thank you. I didn't do it for a job. I did it because it was the right thing to do. But I believe in what you're saying. I'm in." The CEO smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had learned something valuable that night, something that no business deal or negotiation could ever teach him. Respect could not be bought, and it could not be earned through power or money. It had to come from within, and it had to be given freely. And as Miss Williams shook his hand, he realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would no longer measure success by wealth, but by the respect he earned from others. Weeks passed after the meeting with the waitress, and the CEO could feel the changes within himself. He had begun to shift his approach to business and life. He started valuing integrity, honesty, and the power of respect more than ever before. His meetings and interactions were different. He treated everyone with more dignity, from his colleagues to his employees, understanding that true leadership wasn't about domination or control. It was about creating an environment where respect and trust were mutual. As he reflected on his transformation, he couldn't help but think back to the night that changed everything, the night the waitress had stood up for his daughter. The lessons she had unknowingly taught him were not lost on him. The shift in his mindset also began to spread throughout his company. He encouraged his leadership team to think differently about their employees. Rather than seeing them as mere cogs in a machine, he urged them to see the human potential in every individual, no matter their role. It wasn't long before he noticed positive changes. Employees began speaking up more, offering ideas that they once kept to themselves. and the overall atmosphere in the office became more collaborative. The CEO also began investing in initiatives that prioritized respect and equality, ensuring that everyone in his company, regardless of background or position, had equal access to opportunities for growth. He wasn't just giving lip service to the idea of respect, he was actively creating a culture where it could flourish. But his journey was far from over. One day, after a particularly important meeting with his team, the CEO found himself thinking about the waitress again. He realized that her actions had affected not just his company, but his personal life as well. He thought of how his relationship with his daughter had changed. Before that night, he had been a father in title but not always in action. He had been so consumed with work, with building his empire, that he had often neglected the emotional well-being of those he loved most. But now, he made a point of spending more quality time with her, of listening more attentively when she spoke, of being there when she needed him. Their bond grew stronger, and he realized just how much he had taken his family for granted. The waitress had reminded him of the importance of balance, of the need to show up, not just as a boss, but as a father, a friend, a human being who valued others for more than what they could offer him. Inspired by the change he saw in himself and his company, the CEO reached out to the waitress once again, this time with a new proposition. He invited her to lunch, hoping to not only thank her for what she had done, but to discuss how they could work together to create more opportunities for people like her, people who had the talent and the drive, but lacked the platform. Over lunch, they talked about how respect and equality could be woven into the fabric of society, how they could help others see the value in themselves, even when the world tried to push them down. The CEO offered her a position not just within his company, but as a key advisor for his new initiative focused on creating equal opportunities. It wasn't just about giving her a job, it was about empowering her to use her voice and her experience to make real change in the world. She accepted, and they began planning their first project together, one that would focus on providing mentorship and career advancement opportunities for underrepresented communities. The CEO, once a man driven by power and wealth, had now become a champion for equality and respect. The transformation he had undergone was not just about business success, it was about leaving a legacy that would impact lives in a way that money never could. As they shook hands and set their plans in motion, the CEO realized that true success wasn't measured by the empire you built, but by the lives you touched along the way. And it all started with a single moment when a waitress, a woman he had overlooked, had shown him the real meaning of power. As the weeks passed, the CEO's efforts to implement the changes within his company began to bear fruit. The culture was shifting. What had once been an environment defined by competition and hierarchy was now becoming one where collaboration and mutual respect were at the forefront. Employees felt more valued, more heard, and they began to open up in ways they hadn't before. But the transformation didn't stop with the company. The CEO's personal life, too, was being reshaped. He found himself spending more time with his family, more time listening to his daughter, who had grown noticeably closer to him. Their relationship had deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he realized how much of her childhood he had missed. The waitress, Miss Williams, had not only changed his approach to business, but she had also rekindled his sense of what truly mattered. One evening, as he sat at home reflecting on everything that had changed, the CEO felt a deep sense of gratitude. His life had become richer in ways he never expected. He had started to see the world through a different lens, one that valued humanity and respect over wealth and power. And it was all because of a simple moment, a brief but powerful interaction with someone he had once overlooked. But even as things began to improve, the CEO knew the work was far from over. The lessons he had learned were only the beginning. He wanted to do more, not just for his company or his family, but for the community at large. He thought about the people who had been overlooked, marginalized, and undervalued, the people who had the potential to change the world, but had never been given the opportunity. He thought about the waitress and how her actions had made him realize that everyone, no matter their background, deserved respect, dignity, and a fair shot at success. He reached out to Miss Williams again, inviting her to meet for coffee. When they sat down, he could sense her quiet strength, her humility. She had never asked for anything from him, but she had already given him more than he could ever repay. "I've been thinking about our conversation," the CEO said, his voice thoughtful. "You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe, and I want to help change things for others, too. I want to create a program that provides mentorship, job training, and career advancement opportunities for people who are too often overlooked. People like you, like me, like so many others who have the potential to do great things but just need the chance. Miss Williams looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude but also something else, cautious optimism. I appreciate that, she said, her voice steady. But you have to understand, it's not just about giving people a chance. It's about building systems that support them once they have the opportunity. It's about creating real pathways to success, not just handing out opportunities and hoping for the best. The CEO nodded. He had heard her loud and clear. This was not just about making a gesture. It was about creating lasting change, about changing the very structures that had kept people down for so long. And with that, they began planning. Together, they would create a program that went beyond just giving people jobs. They would create a system that would empower people, build confidence, and provide them with the tools they needed to succeed. It was going to take time, effort, and resources, but the CEO was determined to make it work. He knew that the transformation he had undergone wasn't just a personal one, it had to be something bigger. As they worked together, the CEO and Miss Williams began to form a partnership that would ultimately impact many lives. They started small, with a few pilot programs, but the impact was undeniable. People who had been stuck in dead-end jobs or facing barriers to success were now thriving, gaining new skills, and stepping into roles they had never thought possible. The program grew, and with it, the CEO's commitment to creating a more inclusive and respectful world. As the months went by, he saw firsthand how powerful a single moment of respect could be. It had taken one simple act, one moment of defiance, to change the course of his life and many others. And now, he was making sure that respect and dignity would be the foundation of everything he did moving forward. In the end, the CEO realized that true power wasn't about wealth, status, or influence. It was about the ability to lift others up, to give them a chance, and to treat them with the respect they deserved. And that was the legacy he hoped to leave behind. Months passed, and the CEO's transformation had become evident not only in his company but also in the lives of those around him. The program he and Miss Williams had created was beginning to take shape. It was more than just a series of workshops or job training. It was a movement aimed at changing how society viewed people who had been pushed to the margins. The program focused on mentorship, skill building, and creating long-term career opportunities for those who had faced barriers to success. From entry-level positions to leadership roles, it empowered people to rise above their circumstances and prove their worth. One day, the CEO received a letter from one of the first participants in the program. It was a simple note, written in clear, heartfelt words. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I never thought I would have the opportunity to prove myself, but now, I am leading a team in a company I admire. It feels like I've been given a second chance at life." The letter was a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about making money or gaining influence, it was about making a real difference in the lives of others. As the program grew, it started to draw attention from other businesses and organizations. The CEO began speaking at conferences, sharing his story of transformation and urging other leaders to look beyond the surface and see the potential in every individual, regardless of their background. But despite the success of the program, there was always one thing on his mind: the woman who had started it all, Miss Williams. She had not only changed his life, but she had changed the course of his company, and in turn, the lives of hundreds of others. He knew he could never repay her for what she had given him, but he also understood that her influence had gone far beyond the role of an advisor. She had become a symbol of what it meant to stand up for others, to have the courage to speak out and make a difference. One evening, the CEO invited Miss Williams to dinner. They met at a quiet restaurant, a place that had become a favorite of theirs over the months. As they sat down, the CEO looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "I don't know if I've ever said this enough," he began, "but thank you. Thank you for challenging me, for forcing me to see the world differently. If it weren't for you, none of the change we've seen would have happened." Miss Williams smiled softly, her humility still very much intact. "You were always capable of this change," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You just needed the right moment to open your eyes. I'm glad I was able to help bring that moment to light." The CEO nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He had spent so many years focused on building his empire, but now, he realized that the real legacy he would leave behind was not in the wealth he had amassed but in the lives he had touched. As the dinner conversation shifted to their future plans for the program, The CEO thought about everything that had happened. He thought about how far he had come, how the lessons learned from that single night had rippled through every aspect of his life. It wasn't just about offering people a chance. It was about creating a world where everyone had a chance to succeed, no matter where they came from. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. He still had so much work to do, so many people to help, so many lives to change. But now, he approached it all with a sense of purpose and compassion that he had never known before. In the end, the CEO realized that true leadership wasn't about how many people followed you, it was about how many people you helped to rise up alongside you. And as he looked across the table at Miss Williams, he knew that together, they had created something that would live on far beyond their time. A legacy built on respect, dignity, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserved the opportunity to achieve greatness. As the months went by, the CEO continued to reflect on the profound change that had occurred in his life. The business he had once viewed through the lens of power, profits, and prestige now felt like something entirely different. He had learned that true success was not measured by the size of his bank account or the number of deals he closed. It was measured by the impact he made on the lives of those around him, by the legacy he left behind, and by the respect he had earned through his actions. His partnership with Miss Williams had not only changed his business, but had given him a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. Together, they had built something more than just a program. They had built a movement that emphasized respect, opportunity, and dignity for everyone, no matter their background. The ripple effect of their work was beginning to spread far beyond their initial goals. Companies across the country were reaching out, wanting to adopt similar values and practices. The CEO, now more of a mentor than a traditional leader, traveled around the nation, speaking at conferences and hosting workshops. His story became one of transformation, how a single moment, one act of courage and integrity, had changed everything. People who once viewed him only as a businessman began to see him as a force for good in the community. He realized that his work, the work he had once thought was the pinnacle of success, was just the beginning. As the CEO sat in his office one evening, his mind wandered to that fateful night at the restaurant, the moment when everything changed. He could still see the young waitress standing tall, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. Respect isn't yours to give. Those words, simple but powerful, had made him see the world in a new light. He remembered how his daughter had looked up at him in that moment, how her fear had melted away when the waitress had intervened. He had been a part of that moment, but it was the waitress who had truly changed the course of their lives. It was the waitress who had reminded him of the most important things in life: family, respect, and doing what was right, no matter the cost. And now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, surrounded by the success his company had achieved, he knew that none of it would have mattered if he hadn't learned those lessons. He thought about his daughter, about how their relationship had deepened. He was present for her now, really present, in ways he hadn't been before. He had learned that being a good father wasn't just about providing for your family, it was about showing up, being there, and teaching them the values that truly matter. He reached for his phone and dialed Miss Williams. She answered after a few rings. "Hello?" she said, her voice calm as always. "Miss Williams," he began, his voice sincere. "I just wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did for my daughter, but for what you've done for me. You've changed the way I see the world, and because of that, you've helped me change it for so many others. I owe you more than words can express." There was a pause on the other end. "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "You've already done the hard part. You've changed. And that's all that matters." The CEO smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "I promise you," he said, "I'll keep doing the work. I'll keep fighting for a world where everyone gets a chance, no matter their background. You've made me see that it's not just about making money or having power. It's about making sure that respect, kindness, and opportunity are available to everyone. I know you will," she said, her voice warm with encouragement, "and I'll be right here, supporting you every step of the way." The CEO hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He had been a man of great power, but now, he felt truly free. The power he had sought for so long had faded into the background, replaced by a new kind of strength. The strength that came from knowing that his work had a purpose, that his legacy was one of respect, and that he had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that the true measure of a person is not what they accumulate in life, but how they lift others up along the way. In this powerful Black story, a billionaire CEO's life is transformed when a Black waitress stands up for his daughter in a restaurant. challenging the manager's disrespectful behavior. Her simple yet profound words shift the CEO's perspective on respect, power, and leadership. What starts as an act of defiance in the face of injustice becomes a pivotal moment in the CEO's life, changing his approach to business, family, and how he treats others. This Black story teaches the true meaning of leadership, showing that real power doesn't come from wealth or status, but from treating people with dignity and respect. As the CEO learns valuable lessons from the Waitress, he takes steps to make meaningful changes in his company, promoting a culture of equality and opportunity. Inspired by her courage, he builds a program to help those from underrepresented backgrounds succeed, creating a legacy of respect and empowerment. Through this Black story, we witness a journey of transformation, where the CEO not only reshapes his business but his personal life, prioritizing family and human connection over power. The impact of the Black Waitress's actions spreads far beyond that one moment, as the CEO becomes a champion for equality and works to create real, lasting change in society. This Black story serves as a powerful reminder that true leadership and success are not defined by money, but by the respect and opportunities we offer others.